A tough weekend, rounding off a tough 6 weeks in office for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. On Friday, 3 Orthodox Jews were killed at a bus stop in Ramot, a neighbourhood of Jerusalem, including 2 brothers aged 6 and 8, a week after a synagogue attack nearby killed 7. Netanyahu has announced there will be, quote, broader action against terror, whilst National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir has proposed a new wide-scale IDF operation in East Jerusalem. Meanwhile, the controversy over the judicial overhaul, set to weaken the powers of the High Court, is not going away. With the 6th week of protests still having strong numbers, Joe Biden publicly implying his opposition against the bill, and an unprecedented address to the nation from Israeli President Isaac Herzog, is the tide already turning against Netanyahu's government? With polls showing that only 1 in 4 Israelis actually support the judicial reforms, is Netanyahu being anti-democratic, or is he just fulfilling the mandate that was given to him? How should Israel approach tensions in East Jerusalem? What's next for Benjamin Netanyahu?
Okay, gentlemen, so let's get to it. What is next for Benjamin Netanyahu? As always, we begin with our quick fire round, 30 seconds each to lay out your initial stance, and we pick up the conversation from there. So, Mr. Ravivi, please take the lead.
Well, thank you for the first opportunity. I think Netanyahu has proved in the past to be a very talented leader, managed to juggle many balls at the same time. I think this coalition is even more challenging than what we were used to in the past. I think he's going to be a very good fire extinguisher. That's what it looks like.
Okay, on that note, Mr. Raz, your take?
It's hard to know, but I think under this coalition is going to go not all the way, but part of the way with the coalition.
Okay, Mr. Bar-Yoshafat.
I'm going to guess that Netanyahu is going to be the person that's pressing the brakes in this coalition, but I just want to say we have other issues. I hope the legal reform will be passed with all these amendments, but he has other issues to deal with, Iran, economic issues and stuff like that.
Yeah, the agenda here in Israel is always full. Very punctuate, gentlemen, and not even exhausting your 30 seconds. And on that note, you know what? I will begin by saying that when we first started debating this topic here in studio, the host suggested that maybe this entire judicial reform was a mere negotiation tactic, in the sense that, I can ask you, Mr. Ross, can you please go to the supermarket and fetch me some toilet paper and Diet Coke, and you know what? Just a cup of tea would be enough. And then you'll be, okay, a cup of tea? That's nothing. So maybe the goal to begin with was to meet in the middle.
I have no idea, but I think it'll be better for everyone in Israel if both sides will come to some sort of a compromise. So I think that the reform as is right now is a bazillion times better than the current situation. What is bothering me is the fact that I feel like people are burning the whole country down based on something that's not true. Because to say that this reform is undemocratic is it's a blunt lie. People from the right and from the left for the past 20 years have been saying that there's a problem with the checks and balances in Israel, and that the judicial branch has too much power. Now, if people want to say don't have an overruling of 61, let's have it on 63, fine. Add another person to the opposition, from the opposition to the committee that nominates judges, fine. But you don't burn the whole country. You don't have protests. You don't block roads because you disagree if it's 61 or 63.
And even the opposition, Mr. Raz, is admitting the checks and balances not really balanced.
Yeah, I agree, but we don't have a lot of balances because if you compare to other states, for example, we don't have the law of equality. We are not equal in this state. Now, why people talk about democracy? You can have democracy. You can have the same vote if you're equal. If you're not equal, it's not democracy. We got this democracy, this equality, only from the Supreme Court because the Knesset is against equality. So what do you do now? The Knesset is actually against democracy because if not all the citizens are equal, it's not democracy, even if you can vote. So the Knesset is against, again democracy.
You mean that people are against democracy?
Yes, because if you do not support equality, you don't really support democracy. I leave aside the fact that many of the people who live here, say for example in East Jerusalem, that are residents of Israel, but don't get the citizenship, even if they apply. Some of them do get, but majority do not. So What kind of democracy is
Just
that?
so we'll be on the same page here, are you also arguing that if 100 members of Knesset decide something, but in your opinion, it doesn't push for equality, then that's not democratic? I think you're not really understanding the whole concept of democracy and the will of the people.
If it contradicts
Your
the
values.
basic, no, my values, the basic laws, the basic constitution, the basic laws of democracy, yes, I think that the court has something to do here, yes. And this is all about. It's not my values. I am a criticizer of the court. I go every Friday for 13 years to demonstrate against the decisions of the Supreme Court. I criticizing the decision of the court to actually to approve all the settlements that were never established by the government or the Knesset, and only by private people without any jurisdiction.
The main difference where we disagree is not just on the values, is how do we agree when we disagree. And I believe that democracy is the will of the people as it's being represented by its representatives. And you think it's a judge or a committee of judges, 15 people who no one elected. That's tyranny. That's a minority telling everyone else.
They are elected. But what about democracy of free wolves deciding in a majority whom to eat for supper? Is that democracy?
That's a joke to say what's the problem with democracy. That's why in most countries we have a constitution. When Israel does not have a constitution, according to usually your political side, basic laws are somewhat of a constitution.
Yeah.
So right now you can no longer argue, well, Israel cannot have a majority decision because we do have somewhat of a constitution. The argument at the end of the day is this: when there's a conflict of values, who has the final word? Okay. Is it the public or is it the Supreme Court?
But
It's not the public.
But speaking of the public, gentlemen, Mr. Ravivi, when the coalition was first elected and introduced this judicial reform, I would say, rightly said, they were elected to promote the values that they are promoting. But at this point in time, several weeks after the introduction of this reform, revolution, call it as you wish, it seems that the Israeli sentiment vis-a-vis this pending reform is changing. As polls indicate, only 1 in 4 Israelis, meaning a quarter of Israelis, support this reform. So is the coalition, again, at this point in time, is acting on behalf of the people or against the will of the people?
I don't know where you got that quote of a quarter of the people actually support the reform. I think half of the people support the reform, judging by the results of the elections. But if we follow the discussion, which I didn't take part in, between these two gentlemen on my right and my left, I think that's exactly where the judicial reform, where it started, and I, as someone who was in touch with the people behind it, knew for a fact that they would have been satisfied with getting 50% of what they wanted, going back to your question about the supermarket. But the judicial reform discourse discussion in the public took exactly what these two gentlemen were arguing about. It's gone into political spheres about vision and how they want to see the country and what needs to be the solution with the Palestinian people, and it has very little to do with the judicial argument or reform, because Mossi Raz basically agreed that also his people have a lot of criticism as to how the judicial has been working for the last 30 years. And that is something that there was a big consensus within the last 30 years that needed to have a change, and somehow with the powers that govern the discussion in the street, it's taken a completely discourse to deal with politics and nothing with the reform.
Yeah, and by the way, this data is from a recent Channel 12 survey, and a senior diplomatic official told us only last week, while Benjamin Netanyahu was in Paris, that in reference to the international backlash that was gaining momentum, that it's not the judicial reform, but the reaction, the controversy surrounding the judicial reform that is threatening the state of the state. Is that what we're seeing on both the international arena and the domestic one? It's the reaction that is triggering panic? So
I want to say something. It's not really popular from my side. I think that my side, who's very pro the reform, should be more sensitive. I think that the people who are protesting, they are actually concerned. I recognize their pain. I think they're wrong, but I recognize the fact that they're currently really concerned. However, it is a little bit strange to see that the people who were you're unable to pass a threshold, are saying, I'm speaking on behalf of the public. You're not. You're speaking on for an example, former MK Yair Golan. We are the public, and we're going to tell you that the reform is not okay. As an example, Zehava Galon's son, Shimon Peres' son, many people who are behind the protests.
They did not run to the Knesset, so of course they did not take it for them.
Exactly. So if you did not pass the threshold, you cannot say you're speaking on behalf of the people. Number one. Number two, regarding the international world, we just had a different government, less than a few months ago. For some reason, the criticism of Israel did not decline. In fact, it was more than ever. So I'm not sure really that the world cares so much if you have this government or that government. We had the Meretz party in the government, and still people criticize Israel. So it seems like no matter what we do, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. That's the situation here.
Yeah. Gentlemen, it seems I'm listening to you, and we tried to bring in studio an honest reflection of the current state of affairs, and I think we succeeded in this respect. It seems that both sides are now able to sense the pain, if you will, of the other, or at least willing to budge an inch. Are we nearing towards a compromise, just hearing Isaac Herzog speaking tonight, Mr. Raz?
I don't think so. Unfortunately, I think both sides are not willing to listen to the pain of the other side. And if you want, okay, maybe I should include myself in order to show that. I think both sides are not... When I talk to right-wing people, I think they don't even know what is our opinions. I'm not talking about you, of course, but about majority, the right, and maybe it's the opposite when people talk to the. I should say this protest is coming from the center, not from the left wing. So yeah, we have a lot to do, but we have to understand that our democracy. I would not say that Israel is a democracy even before these decisions. So our democracy is really shaking.
Mr. Ravivi, the left who cried wolf, or?
I think the speech that was given just a few minutes ago by the president basically echoed the pains of both sides, and what it was missing was the acknowledgement of both sides. Now that we realize that the other side is in pain, this is where we're going to go forward. This is the round table that we're going to meet around. He definitely expressed the pain on both sides, but there's that lack of now willing to go forward and actually start a discussion about it.
Okay, in the 15 seconds we have left, Mr. Bar-Yoshafat, was the president right to chime in?
I don't know if he's right or not. We'll see. I don't know. I cannot predict the future. I just want to ask one question to Mossi. Do you also recognize the pain of the majority? It's a weird situation in Israel where the majority...
I'm not sure, by the way, that this is a majority. It's only 48% of the people who voted
not the
this government.
Not the majority.
Yeah.
Can you also at least appreciate the fact that people are saying, we want to do something, and people are not respecting it?
Of course I recognize.
Okay, I'll take that as a progress, gentlemen. And on that note, we will be taking a very short break, but when we get back, other battlefronts, if you will, Israel is facing the security escalation still very much present. Another deadly weekend in Jerusalem. Can the government change anything? Break, and we're back. Welcome back to the summit. Still with us here in studio, Oded Ravivi, mayor of Gov't, former foreign chief envoy of the Yesha Council, Mossi Raz, former member of the Israeli parliament of the leftist Meretz party, and political commentator and legal expert, attorney Bar-Yoshafat. Thank you, gentlemen, very much for staying with us. We're, of course, also staying on topic, but shifting focus, if you will, to another front, the security arena. And here, the battlefield is within the coalition to an extent. But first, let's take a quick listen.
The appropriate answer to terror is to strike it hard and to further deepen our roots in our country. Accordingly, the Cabinet is meeting today to prepare for an even broader action against those carrying out terrorism and their supporters in East Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria, while preventing as much as possible harming those uninvolved.
I have ordered the police to conduct a second defensive shield operation in Jerusalem, a governance operation. To go into the houses, we have 150 targets, to arrest them, to search, to demolish houses without fear, and without telling the public in Israel stories, running some small shacks, to hand out traffic tickets, to place governance over Jerusalem.
So let's get to it. Is Israel heading towards a third intifada? Some suggest we're in the midst of such. Another quick fire round, and we pick it up from there. Mr. Raz, take the lead, please.
Actually, I think it started in the previous government under Gantz. Okay. When you act in a violent way, you get violence, and I'm saying that to both sides. I'm not saying that our side is acting more violence or started with that, but this is a kind of round that we are facing all the time.
Never-ending cycle. Run Bar-Yoshafat?
Yeah, I think it's a repulsive statement. It's not a cycle. One side is trying to murder Jews because they're Jews. One side has reached its hand for peace for the past 75 years. Shimon Peres, the hawkish Shimon Peres, said it's not a chicken and egg story. They attack us, we retaliate. I don't think it's going to be an intifada. I hope not, but I don't think it's violence causing violence. They're trying to murder us. We're trying to defend ourselves.
Last but not least, Mr. Ravivi.
I don't think we need to find excuses for why they want to attack us, why they want to kill us. They've been doing that for generations, more than 75 years. We definitely need to try a different way to try and solve the conflict with them. But I don't think that we need to justify or find reasons why they're actually killing and murdering innocent kids.
And let's feel free to interact from this point onwards. What is it that Israel isn't doing right when it comes to East Jerusalem?
It's not just East Jerusalem. It's when you want to combat terror and you want to live like a Western country with democratic rules and you respect lives, and the other side doesn't respect lives and has no problem murdering 2 innocent kids on Friday afternoon for the crime that they committed standing in a bus stop. It's not an equal equation, and we're dealing with them like Westerners, and they're murdering us like animals.
Mr. Raz.
When you oppress a nation for so many years, Israel has to decide one of 2 possibilities. One possibility is to share two-state solution, and the other side wanted. Israel is refusing in the last 2 decades, actually always, or give them the right to vote and have one state. But you cannot oppress people. Even in the capital of Israel, 40% of the population have no rights. They have no right to vote. They have some rights, but they are not citizens. They have no right to vote, in spite of the fact that they were born there, even before Israel came there. Even when they ask for citizenship, many of them denied, and even those who get, it takes years. So if you oppress a nation, if you show them that they are under your oppression, I think it's not, first, this is not moral. For everything. Second, we saw that after 67 we have way more violence than before 67.
Yeah.
The only problem with this is just reality. First of all, they're not a nation. The PLO was created in 64. Israel did not control Judea and Samaria and Gaza. Should I go through the whole history lesson here?
Yeah, but they did not kill even one Israeli before 67.
They're the only group in the world that has refused a deal. They're the only group in the world that is using political leverage to continue terror. Israel accepted the Jews accepted 15% of what was promised to it. But at the end of the day, all you're saying, apart from the fact that it's historically false in my understanding, it doesn't make any difference. You cannot justify the fact that someone is murdering 2 kids.
I'm not justifying.
Well, it kind of seems like it.
You justify. You say that they are like that. You justify.
No, I never. I
want to stop it.
Never said.
No, you justify.
Never said.
So don't say that I justify. You justify.
I'm arguing that the leadership of the Arabs of Judea and Samaria and Gaza, that the only thing
born like that.
You're saying it. I never said it. You can keep on saying that I'm saying it, but I've said it. I'm not saying this for the 10th time. I'm saying that the leadership of the Arabs of Judea and Samaria and Gaza, which, by the way, the only thing that they do have in common, the leadership, is their willingness to murder Jews. They are giving incentives for people to murder Jews, because if you murder a Jew and you sit in the Israeli prison, you get 5 times more money than the average pay under the PA.
Okay, but now there's a full-on, quote-unquote, full-on right-wing government, right? Will it actually execute right-wing policies?
First of all, I don't think it's really a full right-wing government. I know every time Netanyahu is elected, all the media says this is the most religious and right-wing government. I don't think the Shas party are very right-wing. They supported the Oslo Accords.
They did not support Oslo.
They supported disengagement.
They did not vote for Oslo.
Okay. But anyways, I don't think it's so right-wing. I do hope that right now, because the public, at the end of the day, usually in Israel, because we're a parliamentary system, you vote for the parliament, and you don't know how the government is going to be formed. I would argue that this election, basically, you voted for a government. It was either Netanyahu and gang or anti-Netanyahu Netanyahu gang.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, the public who voted, about 11% of the people who usually vote for Likud voted for the religious Zionist party because they said we want you to use more force. A lot of people who usually vote for the left voted for Ben-Gvir because they felt they have no personal security. I think it'll be for the benefit of all of Israel if they will actually also perform a right-wing policy.
But speaking of Ben-Gvir, will the National Security Minister be able to influence the government's policy, or understanding the limitations of power?
I think there's a problem within your question. I don't really believe that there's a right-wing policy when you combat terror.
Okay.
So what can they do? They will do more demolitions. That's not a change of policy. It's the same policy. It's just a matter of how many times do you exercise it. And at the end of the day, I think what Itamar Ben-Gvir is starting to realize is that there is a limit for power. If during his campaign he was walking around waving with his handgun, now he's waving with the troops that he's sending, and all of a sudden he realizes that even if he'll send those troops, it won't necessarily stop that individual terrorist who wakes up in the morning and wants to drive through over a bus stop murdering 2 innocent kids. Nothing will help in order to stop that. And in order for that to do, you have to combat a way more sophisticated system which is based on very high intelligence, try and find the people who are actually governing it, and even then we know that we have the lone terrorists that we aren't able always to catch them before they actually go and do what they want.
But is there a security solution to the security situation, gentlemen?
I think there's always more that can be done. At the end of the day, it's how much effort you put into it, how much funds you have to put into it. And in a state like Israel, we're putting a lot of money into security, and whatever we put is never enough because the needs are even greater.
Mr. Raz?
First, in order to solve the problem or to confront the problem, I'm not sure that we can solve.
Yeah.
We have to reach an agreement, and there is an agreement on the table. The Israeli government doesn't want. Actually, all the Arab governments want. I'm not talking about Arab nations. I'm talking about Arab governments. Second, and of course the Palestinian one. Second,
the Palestinians are willing to sign an existing agreement?
Arab League Peace Initiative. Palestinians are part of that. This is 67 borders with swap of land, with just and agreed solution to the question of the refugees. This is what they offer in the last 2 decades. Israel refused. Second, when you act in a violent way, and this is the fault of the previous government, you got more violence. Gov't actually told the soldiers he eased the way that they can shoot, and part of that is that 3 out of 7 Israeli soldiers who were killed in their territories were killed by their friends because they shoot very quickly.
Okay, rules of engagement, that's...
No, I'm sorry, I disagree. I disagree with all of it, but I think we have an argument on facts. But I actually think that the rules of engagement should be completely different and more easy for the soldiers. But I think that, I need to brush my teeth every night and every morning, and I think, unfortunately, until our neighbors will, as long as they want to murder us, we'll have to combat that. And I don't think that's going to change. I think there's nothing that Israel can do to make them stop wanting to murder us, apart from one thing, and that is we need to dictate what they teach in their schools, because when the moderate PA teaches their children the Jews are descendants of apes and pigs and it's good to murder them, we're going to have more terrorists.
Well, short-term solutions, in fact, the long-term solutions, it seems, time and time again. Gentlemen, thank you so very much for coming all the way over here to studio. Hopefully we will be seeing you again. Thank you very much for this.